Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Deb. This is an absolute pleasure to have you here. Your book has some really powerful content in there, and I would absolutely love to talk more about what brought you to writing such an intense book.
Which book are you talking about, Rhiannon?
Hang on a second, I'll just pull it up. I can't pull it up at the moment because the camera will pick up what's on my screen. Oh, but I believe you had one that was referring to suicide in men.
Okay. Yeah, I just had to clarify that book. I think, just let me go and get it. Is this the one you're talking about? Marginalisation
Yes,
of men? Okay,
yes.
right, great. Okay. Yeah, that was my sole authored book, and that was as a result of my PhD thesis. So I did my thesis about older men and suicide ideation. And it's a little known fact, really, that older men have the highest rate of suicide globally.
Yep.
So, so that was a result of my thesis.
My
And
laptop is just saying that it wants to turn off. Just give me 1 second to
oh,
get the
you poor
power cable
thing.
for it. So, you were talking about how the rates in older men are, I think, the largest demographic, aren't they?
They are the largest, globally, the largest demographic of suicide globally. So, actually, my thesis is so are you familiar with my background story?
I have read up on it, but
Yeah.
please, for the people watching the interview, give us a bit of a rundown of your journey.
So my son Rory died of cancer
Oh,
when he was
condolences.
19 years old, and I was in my mid-50s. I'm originally a primary school teacher, and I'd started my PhD. I had a master's in education, which I specialised in boys and literacy. So I'd started a doctorate prior to Rory being diagnosed, and then, of course, abandoned all of that. And Rory was diagnosed with an osteosarcoma in the January, and he died 3 days before Christmas the same year.
Gosh.
Yeah, heartbreaking.
Yeah.
So I had about nearly 2 years off from school. We have income protection. And so during my time off from school, I contacted my supervisor from my original doctorate and said, I would really like to start studying. I can't go back to school. I couldn't string sentences together at that stage.
Yeah,
And I cried, of
understandably.
course, all the time. And so he just said, yeah, sure. And I said, I have no idea about a topic. And he said, well, I have a topic, suicide ideation in older men. And I went, fine. So 6 months into my bereavement leave, I started my doctorate. And it was fantastic. I mean, the topic is awful.
Yes.
But I went to, my field work was comprised of 10 men's sheds in southeast and southwest Queensland. And
Beautiful.
also here in Toowoomba, we have an older men's network called TomNet. So I went to 3 different groups that they have as well. And 7.5 years later, I had my doctorate. And then my supervisor and I decided, Professor Patrick Danaher, decided that we would write together. And so we have about 5 books that we have edited with Palgrave and Routledge. And also I have that book that I have produced from my thesis.
Amazing.
So
Absolutely incredible. incredible.
Yeah, it's and I've just completed another PhD on grief and
Gosh.
bereavement in motherhood.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the topics that affect us that we never, it's not, suicide is something I would hope no one would have to encounter. Um, but then bereavement is something that is inherent in life. Um, the only time you don't suffer bereavement is if you die young, as far as I'm concerned. There's always things that you'll grieve. It'll be moving house, moving school, losing lovers, just separation. And then it goes through to losing family members and friends. The death is, there's a thing going around lately, in the Victorian era. And I'd say right up until nearly the 50s, you could talk about death, but you couldn't talk about sex. And now you can talk all you want about sex, but death is very taboo to talk about. It's something that people feel increasingly uncomfortable speaking about. And that's both elements are such natural parts of life. And it's so important to be able to discuss them because it always feels like you're so alone in that moment, but you're not.
Death by suicide is stigmatized,
Mm,
definitely. I am in the unfortunate position to know that Rory's death by cancer is not as stigmatized as if he had committed suicide,
mm,
which is it's a cultural unfairness, really. And I don't know. I hope that the book, with the marginalisation of older men, I would hope that that book goes some way to dispelling a lot of that taboo and a lot of that bias. So in the book, part of my PhD was putting out a conceptual framework and not a solution, if you like, because death by suicide is a wicked problem. It's a cultural wicked problem. So there is
yes.
no one solution. But part of my PhD was establishing a conceptual framework about how it might be prevented.
Yeah.
So I think that book, so that book was only a very small part of my PhD, and it addressed my research questions, which also addressed my conceptual framework, which is that if you have no purpose in life, then it's very, very difficult to go on. And
Mm.
a lot of people in the Toowoomba region have experienced death by suicide with farmers.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
a lot of times the farmers, with all of the succession lines and all of that sort of stuff, unless the older farmers are welcomed back onto the farm and have a reason to keep on going, then they see nothing
Yeah.
in their future. And unfortunately, farmers are ideally positioned to commit suicide.
They're often the ones that have acceptable guns on the
They have
property.
the guns, exactly, and it's very sad. So part of my conceptual framework was addressing the contributive needs of older men, and that a contributive need is a need to feel valued,
Mm.
and a need to feel accepted as part of a community. So
It,
yeah, that was a lot of what the thesis was about.
yeah, your thesis actually lends itself to I'd say a lot of society's issues. Not having a community leads people to feeling more depressed. They're more susceptible to join unsavory groups, and they're more susceptible to things like drug use. Gang violence, being part of gangs, but also even terrorist groups. So having community and having acceptance and purpose within your community, that's what humans lean towards. That's nearly the purpose of being human, is to have purpose.
Mm. Humans are relational and they
Mm,
need
yes,
a tribe in which to belong.
yes,
So if you don't feel that you belong anywhere, if you don't feel that you are valued for the person who you are, then what is there really for
yeah.
you? What is the point of it all?
I wonder. I wonder if that's part of the reason that women are less susceptible to it. Obviously, they are still, but I wonder if being raised to be people that maintain the house, maintain children, that is generational, and that's something that never ends. So, of course, you feel like there's that use for you in those moments, even if it's, doing housework or just minding the children sort of thing, whereas men aren't given those tasks. I think in more recent generations, they are. There's a bit more of an even split in household and emotional labor, but definitely older men weren't given these tasks. They weren't given these roles. So without work, I can see that they would often fall. They would succumb to these feelings of feeling purposeless.
There is a school of thought. I'm getting a bit of echo there. Is that okay? Are you getting echo on
I'm not
your?
getting echo from you, but I was getting echo from me.
Okay. There's a school of thought that is called biological determinism, and I think our older males, that's like women are nurturers, men are risk takers type thing. Just putting it baldly. And I think our older generations are certainly prey to that sort of a school of thought where they like to solve problems, they like a bit of action, they like to do things, and generally their wives are the nurturers in the family, keep the family together, look after the grandchildren or whatever, the children, while the men have gone to work. Certainly, that is a school of thought that has quite a bit of currency, I think, in our older generations. I look at our younger generations coming through and I see that women are demanding more
Mm,
from their male partners, and I'm speaking in very gendered terms here. And I, I hope that that's changing, but when I was writing my PhD, the ratio of men to women committing suicide was 4-1.
yeah,
So men, and if you like, men are far more efficient at it.
yeah,
Women still attempt suicide, but for them, it's not an act that they actually want to see through. It's more of a cry for help.
mm,
For men, it's right, this has happened, bam, I'm
yeah,
gone. So
yeah.
it's a very interesting. I'm thinking that, and I don't have any latest figures because I haven't done any research lately on this, but I'm thinking that those numbers are, particularly in the men's sphere, are coming down.
That's good.
So yeah, but it's a very, I don't like to, it's a very gendered topic, this whole
It
suicide thing,
it
and my
really
PhD
is.
was very gendered.
Yeah. It's a unique thing. it really does separate those gender identities, and it does put them into a bit of a binary with that. Um, and I do think, from the research and the studies that I've done on the topic as well, because I have several friends that have, mostly women, so it's that cry for help. But they constantly threaten suicide, and they have constant suicidal ideations. And it's traumatizing for the people around you to not be able to offer the help that they need to resolve it. But there's, when I'm just thinking about male and female, the transgender community also
Mm,
seems they have an exorbitant amount
mm,
of suicidal ideation when
mm,
they're not
mm,
accepted. And I think they, honestly, if it's going to save a life, just call them what they want.
mm. Again, it's that tribe thing, isn't it?
Yeah,
They
it's
don't feel
really
that they
purpose.
belong.
Yeah. It
Mm,
really does come down to that, doesn't it?
mm,
That's incredibly fascinating, that
mm,
having your identity and having that, attachment, that it's like the, acknowledgement of ego. So not making it sound like it's a toxic thing, but acknowledging that there is, we're human, we have a version of ego within our sentience, and that, finding a way for that to be part of tribe, part of a community, is what will save lives, and that's incredible.
mm. And this is the good thing about men's sheds. You walk in, like I was an older woman researching older men. So I was a little bit concerned that they would have a bias towards me. You're an older woman. What would you know anything about what we go through? Blah, blah, blah. And there was absolutely none of that.
Mm,
There was no, I had, and also I was writing about this the other day. I had sort of a bit of a bias towards older men, thinking that, will I be able to connect with these men? Will they take me seriously? All of that sort of stuff. And there's absolutely nothing in any of that. I would walk in and I'd say, I'm Debbie Mulligan. I'm doing a PhD on older men and suicide ideation, and they'd go, "Oh, thank God somebody is."
oh,
And that's just, and they would sit and chat to me for hours. And it
yeah.
was just the most wonderful, life affirming thing. My fieldwork was just absolutely wonderful.
Oh,
I enjoyed every
wonderful.
minute of it. And the men were so appreciative. They didn't really hold back at all. They recognized that it was a problem. And this is, what's the whole raison d'etre for TomNet, our local organisation here, because that was started by 5 older men who had seen the suicide rates in the farmers just escalate in our
Yes.
area of the
Yeah.
Darling Downs. So they started the group up there, and they're male only. So
Yeah.
I only went to male only men's sheds, and TomNet is male only.
Yeah.
Women can be associate members, but they cannot be full-blooded members. And they have, weekly meetings, and they do a lot of community work.
Yeah.
They have, card nights and barbecue days and all sorts of things. And TomNet is just the most wonderful organisation. And again, I thought I had to have an interview with the board, the TomNet board, and that was about a dozen men in this very austere boardroom, and they just couldn't have been nicer. They were just amazing. I had to explain to them what my thesis was about and what my hypotheses were and all of this sort of stuff, and they just embraced the whole thing. And so I had really carte blanche to the whole organisation, and it was the same as men's sheds.
Yeah.
They were, each men's shed is autonomous, but word got around, especially in Toowoomba, and they were just wonderful. They were just wonderful, and couldn't have done enough to help me. Yeah, I was very fortunate with my field work.
Oh, it's
Sadly.
so you're right. You're absolutely right. It's so affirming about about older men, eliminating those stereotypes, and it's so beautiful to hear about a sacred space just for men as
Mm,
well.
mm,
Women are very good at making sacred spaces just
mm,
for them.
mm,
And I know that it seems to be a much harder thing for men to do. And it's so beautiful to have a space for them to be able to connect in a way. Like a spiritual thing. Um,
absolutely. Mm,
yeah, and again, it's so important because this is a huge issue for men across the continent, across the globe. And as we redefine what positions in life and society we have for one another, there's no clear cutness anymore. So often I think it's about defining your own purpose as you're going through these things and discovering what that is on your journey through life.
exactly. Men's sheds actually have taken off globally. So they started in Australia, in South Australia, late 80s, I think, 1980s. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure it was 89, with just one shed started by a nurse, actually, a female in South Australia. And it was supposed to just be a space for men only. And again, it's very gendered. But it was supposed to be just this space for men who wanted to come and work shoulder to shoulder, because there is a school of thought that says that men won't sort of sit down and discuss stuff with you. They like, if you work with them, then that's when all the problems, they will talk about their problems. They don't
Yeah.
like to have to make eye contact. Women, I've found, don't you find that when you chat to your girls, it all just comes out. It's just like blah, all your
Yeah.
stuff comes out, and you just share all that shit,
Yes,
together.
absolutely.
Whereas men of that generation bottle it up, and that's the problem. But if they're in a working environment, they've retired or they can't get a job or whatever. They're still working, creating things, projects that perhaps they might want to work on, or projects that the community has asked them to
Mm,
do. So they're shoulder to shoulder and they're working together. And that's when all of that stuff can start to come out. And I did male only men's sheds because they were very determinedly male only, and they said that they couldn't have the conversations that they have if there were women present. And a lot of them had the population to be able to support that. But places like Claremont and Western Queensland have to, well, they welcome women in so that they can keep the men's shed going. So
yeah.
one of the things that I grappled with to begin with was that some men's sheds actually aren't just for men. They're women. They have women members as well. And so I actually talked to a man from one of the men's sheds out west, and he said that they were fine having women there. It didn't bother them at all. Whereas my focus, fieldwork, men's sheds, said no, we don't have men. We have nothing against women, and a lot of them had like women visitors and all of that sort of stuff, but they cannot be members of the men's shed.
Yeah.
It's strictly male only.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really, as you were saying, sacred spaces. I thought that's fine. That's fine. Why do people get so annoyed with men who want their own spaces? Women have had their spaces for a very long time. Um,
I think the only for it to be a sacred space, that no issue, not any issue at all. That's a place of healing for them and communication. But I think when it came to men's only spaces that were where crucial business deals were happening or crucial
Yeah.
decisions on the community were happening and women weren't permitted into that area, that's when I think there's still a little bit of an echo of that. People aren't
Mm,
differentiating between this is a space of healing and a space of like a spiritual men's space. This is where the energy of masculinity is held. And this space over here is a space of community. And if you're excluding women from a space of community, then you can dig your heels in. But if it's a man's spiritual space, then it just needs to be that.
absolutely. There was a club in Brisbane who were overtly excluding women. It was a business club,
I remember
and
that one. They got in big trouble for that, didn't they?
you know, and so they should.
Yeah.
So they should. Yeah. So as you so rightly point out, there's a time and a place.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Time and a place.
And I think acknowledging the difference between the two spaces is really important. You
Mm,
can't intrude on certain spaces, and that's just how we're built. Um, Different people have different energy.
mm,
And
mm,
when you have an accumulation of a similar type of person, like if you just have all of these older men together, they have a particular type of energy and they have comfort in that. You don't want to introduce a different type of energy that's going to skew that or disrupt it. Um,
mm. Well,
yeah,
we're talking about saving lives, aren't we, with Men's Shed
exactly.
and Tomnet? We're talking about suicide here and saving lives. It's interesting, though, the future of men's sheds in Australia, because it was sort of set up in such a gendered sort of a manner, um, and the average age perhaps of a men's shed, well, certainly the average age of the men's sheds that I visited was between 65 and 70. So those men have that sort of shortened span. And what will happen to the men's sheds if they don't attract younger men?
Mm,
So at the moment, it's a little precarious, whereas overseas, they attracted the younger men straight away. So in Scotland, they have a really healthy, in the United Kingdom, they have a really healthy set of men's sheds. Hawaii, like they're global,
yeah.
Canada. Um,
Possibly getting involved with universities and with high schools will be a good way to bridge that.
I think geography has a bit to do with it too, because let's face it, Australia's a lot bigger
Yeah,
country,
everything's
that's
very far away from everything else.
exactly. And I think geography may work against us as well, but yeah, we'll see.
Yeah,
We'll see. But I know that they do have a few issues attracting younger men.
yeah,
So yeah, that's an interesting thing to look at in the future as well.
definitely. Oh, it's such a powerful topic. It's such an important topic.
Hmm.
And I think the work that you've done is incredibly important.
Oh,
Um,
thank
and
you, Rhiannon. Thank you. That's a
no,
nice affirmation.
no, you're so
Yeah.
welcome. Um, yeah, it's a huge problem, and I think it's one of those things where you'll never fully eliminate it, but you can reduce it drastically. Um, and it would be lovely to find a place where you could fully eliminate it. But understanding it, not making it taboo, um, you know, I think that has a huge component to it. Being able
Hmm.
to talk about it is incredible.
Making it accessible. It's not, in my opinion, it's not enough to write a book. So the men who I interviewed, I did semi-structured interviews, and I also did focus groups, and did a survey, which was a bit hilarious. But it's not enough just to pop in and say, I'm a PhD student, I'm doing this study, blah, 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 because they have so many students who pop in, ask what they want to ask, and are never seen again.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just simply use those men as a target for your field work.
Yeah.
And it's not enough simply to write a book about it. So, in my opinion, there's a lot of reciprocity that should go on. So after I had written my book, I took a copy to all of the men's sheds and all of the Tomnet groups that I went to, and I gave them a copy of the book. And I also gave them a booklet. I went back to each of the sheds and back to each of the Tomnet groups, and I gave them like a 5-page booklet of my findings. And they were really appreciative of that because, again, purposeful study. They could see what I was doing, where I was going, and the outcome of that as well. And then I did a few community talks about suicide ideation in older men, etc., etc. So because, you and I are all about books, I don't feel that it's enough simply to do the study, write the book.
Yeah.
What's the point? What's the point of writing an academic book that only a very few people will access? You need to get the word out there. So that's what I tried to do for quite some time, actually, years afterwards.
And I think it's with that attitude you build such stronger relationships.
Mm.
And I think any authors doing any kind of research, you often hear of authors getting grants to do research and that sort of stuff. Any authors doing any sort of research should find ways to give back to the people and the communities that they are collecting the information from. It's so important to make sure that everyone is left feeling like they've gained something out of the interaction.
Yeah, it's a form of activism.
Yes, yeah.
You see this issue that's, it's a cultural, societal issue. It's taboo. It shouldn't be. Do something about it. Change people's attitudes. Get it out into the open. Let's talk about it.
Beautiful.
So that's what I tried to do through the book. Yeah.
I think you've done a fantastic job.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much for chatting with me today, Deb. This has been so, it's been heartwarming. It has been.
Oh, how lovely. That's very nice of you. Thank you. I appreciate the interview, and I appreciate your interest. It's wonderful, really.
I am definitely a sort of a fixer person. If I see something that's not right or that's hurting someone, I have to fix it. And so when you see someone who is in a dark place, or when they're not talking, when they feel like they've lost key elements of themselves, I just always want to jump in and help put a balm on it. And help them start healing. So this is something that's close to my heart as well.
And death is so final, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, exactly.
But the one takeaway that I did get from the whole thing, so I was invited to do online talks and all of this sort of stuff through the men's group that comes out of Sydney. And to be honest, it annoys me when people put up a 5-point slideshow about how you can prevent someone from committing suicide. I'm sorry, it's not that easy.
No.
You can't do that. Like ask them if they're okay, all of this sort of stuff. That's fine, but if somebody won't talk to you about it, or if someone's already made up their mind, then that creates, and they actually go through with the act, that creates a lot of guilt from the people who are left behind, and think, I should have seen this. I should have seen this coming. I should have done something about it. It's actually not that easy.
No.
It's not that simplistic And I think we need it. As I said at the beginning of the talk, it's such a wicked problem.
Yeah.
There's no one solution. And academics, whatever, social workers, whatever, who put up these slides, and I've seen a lot of them, about how you can help somebody who's thinking of committing suicide. How does that leave the person who's left behind, who did all those things? Oh, I talked to them about it. I talked to their friends. You can't be with a person 24 hours a day. And if they're determined, the statistics show if they're determined, they're going to do it. And the people who are left behind should not have that burden of guilt placed upon them. So through the book, with the purposeful living and addressing contributive needs, I was hoping to do something a little bit more proactive than a 5-point slide. And that's probably very controversial, but I don't care. I've seen it.
Yeah.
I've talked to these men. So, yeah, anyway, I'm hoping that
it's not a 5-point issue. It's much like crafting an artisan cabinet. It needs a purpose, and it needs constant, delicate handling. It needs to be repolished. It needs to be looked after, much like any other piece of furniture and much like anyone else in your community. You can't just do your 5 steps and think that that's going to work for any of the problems that people are suffering from.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's also not your people are not your responsibility. You are your own responsibility, and you can only do your best.
We own ourselves. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, like, death was an accepted part of life, and people would gather round, they would celebrate the life of that person, and it would be out there in the community. They would talk about death. It was part of life, all of that sort of stuff. But then the Industrial Revolution occurred, and people became more and more isolated, more and more fixed on their own lives and their jobs and their own trajectories. And a little bit of our humanity got left behind, I think. So, yeah, it's a definite problem for the 21st century, that's for sure.
That's actually something that I mention in my books, or don't mention in my book series, but they never reach the Industrial Revolution, so they never lose that part of themselves.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah. So if you need something lighthearted, you can always read my stuff.
Lovely, lovely.
I think we've gone past that point on Earth, and we need to now learn what the new normal is, or we need to decide what we want everything to be resculpted into. We need to look at the parts that aren't working, that are disconnecting us, and work at eliminating them. Work at reusing them or repurposing them in ways that work for us and suit us as humans.
And work on acceptance, I think. I think we've become incredibly insular in our values and our acceptance of other people. And we've got these cultural norms where if you don't fit in, then you're seen as other.
Yes.
And when you're seen as other, you've lost that tribe that you used to belong to. And that for some people, for most people, being seen as other is not a comfortable fit.
No. I think when it comes to things like that, get offline. If you find yourself in that, get away from the internet for a week or two and go and talk with real people. Because in the real world, people want to be compassionate. When you are face to face with energy and emotion of other people around you, you naturally want to avoid conflict. You want to avoid these arguments. You don't want to upset other people, and they don't want to upset you. You have far more pleasant interactions when you are face to face with people more frequently than online.
I do find now that, so I'm a baby boomer, if you do that generational thing, and I do find that there that baby boomers are a bit more narrow-minded than the next generations, and I think that is a bit of an issue with with older men and suicide ideation, because they have been raised a certain way, and the world was a bit more narrow.
It was much more simple.
Oh, well, yeah, but was it? I mean,
Well,
we were told
we
that it
gave
was.
we got the illusion it was much more simple.
Yeah, yeah. So I think, your generation, the generations that have come after me will be a lot more accepting
My
of.
generation gets, my generation is the one that gets anxious about offending anyone.
Yeah.
Um, so I think
Yes.
the boomers are upset that things aren't feeling as simple and as easy as they used to feel, and my generation is like, oh, but did I just say the wrong thing? Like, oh, we're riddled with anxiety over that, rather than this deep sense of loneliness.
I think too that's a very gendered. It's a very male female. I think men, because of the white male privilege or whatever, have been taught that they can say anything, really, can't they? And whereas women are a little more circumspect about how
Yes.
they interact.
Yes, they are far more. It's very much more guarded,
I think privilege
delicate.
has a lot to do with stuff as well.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Oh, well, thank you so much for joining me today, Deb. This has been a fantastic talk, and I can't wait
Thank
to
you.
hear you on the Overcoming Adversity panel on the 9th and
Oh,
10th of June.
yeah, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that very much.
No, absolutely. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we will see you in the next couple of months. I think it's like
Lovely.
51 days away or something.
Is that right? I'll have to set the countdown on my phone.
You can find the countdown on the Logan Writers Festival website.
Of course, yes, I did
Yes,
see that the
that's
other
how I
day.
know how many days away it is.
Okay, lovely.
Bindi did a great job on the website. So check it
She
out, grab
did,
your
yeah.
tickets, and you don't have to grab your tickets, Deb, but everyone watching, grab your tickets, and we will see you on the 9th and 10th of June.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.